Welcome to Moderate to Severe, the podcast where we will dive deep into what it means to be a man today and tackle the real and raw issues facing us. We've created a safe space for setting aside the bravado, peeling back the armor, and talking about what's really going on inside. Mental health is no longer just a buzzword. It's real life and something that I, just like many of you, suffer through daily. I'm Jonathan Scott, and I want to focus on the value of vulnerability through personal stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you take care of your mental well-being and redefine what strength really is. We'll dive into the everyday battles we face, from handling stress, overcoming self-doubt, and figuring out how to ask for help and accept it. Each week, I'll be sharing my own experiences, along with stories from other men, mental health experts, and everyday people who have seen or been through it all. So if you're here to listen, to learn, or just feel less alone, you're in the right place. So get comfortable and let's break the silence together. So on this episode of Moderate to Severe, I have Kristin Gartner, the owner and I would say counselor at the Bright Horizons Counseling Services down in Northern Virginia. So Kristin, I have known for many, many years. We actually went to college together, and she was nice enough to come on and talk about it, her program, the things they offer, and just mental health in a nutshell. Kristin, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. So we haven't talked in a long time. How long have you been in the field of mental health?
I've been in the field about 15 years. I've had my own practice for going on, well, nope. So I've been in the field for about 17 years. I've had my own practice now for going on 14 years.
Now, did you come out of school with the mental health degree, or is this a secondary
No.
career?
I came out with education. So I was a K-3 teacher for about 5 years. And then I was in pretty much like an inner city setting. And I found that I was doing a lot more like caretaking than I was doing teaching. And so that kind of like sparked my passion to go back and get my master's.
Any desire to go back into the classroom, or do you like what you're doing now?
I love what I'm doing now. This is what I think, you kind of fall into something and you're like, this is what I was made to do. This is what I was made to do.
That's awesome. Why did you start your own practice? Why did you branch out and start Bright Horizons?
Well, a couple of things. One was the practice that I did my residency in that I got hired in afterwards it was just this humongous practice that sort of became like an in and out center, and it was great experience, but it wasn't the kind of counseling that I wanted to do. Like I really wanted to not have like really strict guidelines on like, get them in, get them out, make them better, and then like move them forward. Like that just wasn't sort of didn't fit the model that I wanted. So I ended up really specializing in the early part of my career in children. So I did a lot of play therapy and younger children, and there was just this humongous need. Not a lot of people do children because they're difficult. Play therapy is not super easy, and so there was a huge need in my area, and it's really interesting because it just sort of happened naturally. It was me, and then I had a resident, and then a couple of people sort of reached out to me, and they were like, I'm looking for a job, and it just sort of naturally happened. And now it's now I have 30 clinicians that work for me, but that's almost 15 years later.
You have 30 clinicians under you. Now, are most of them packed their schedules, or?
Yeah, we're still running a waiting list. It's for quite a while, especially during COVID, we had like a 4-month waiting list. And so I have licensed counselors, I have a couple of licensed social workers, and we do training, so we have interns and residents as well. So it's a little bit of a teaching center along with, a counseling practice, which is really nice being able to train like future clinicians. But yeah, we are still running about a 2-month wait list. So the need is just so incredibly profound.
Yeah, one of the things I found when doing this is the fact that, and we'll talk about this later, is that the resources aren't there. The people that need help can't get it. A lot of times, do you find that these people who are calling you to get in are in crisis and kind of need to get in right away, but there's no openings?
Well, I will get some. I'm lucky enough to have a wonderful support staff. And so they know how to triage. If somebody's really in crisis, and we'll either get them into the emergency room or we'll try and get them, in as quickly as we possibly can. But like you said, everybody's full. I mean, like we know everybody in the area, and if we can't get somebody in who needs to be seen, we'll call around to try and see if we can get them into another practice. Everybody's on wait lists. It's just, I don't know of any practice that is not on a wait list at this point.
So I guess one of the things out there, if you're thinking about a career in the mental
Yeah.
health field, would be something that would be probably you'll have a job available for you at the same time. Um, so I guess it goes to my next question is, do you think that there's still a need for these counseling centers out? I mean, is it a dire need? I mean, is it at a pandemic level now, the mental health crisis?
I, throughout my career, I've seen a lot, and I think we're getting there. I think we're kind of on the cusp, which is really scary, especially, we knew there'd be repercussions from COVID. And we're now really, really seeing it, especially with the kids who are super young when COVID hit and they didn't get those early socialization years with going into elementary school, and with the teenagers that lost their last couple of years of high school are now like very anxiety ridden. And I would say like the primary thing we treat right now is anxiety. And unfortunately, it's divorce, because the divorce rates have really skyrocketed because for some reason, COVID just did a number on people's relationships. And so I've had to hire more marriage and family counselors in the last 3 years than I've had in my like whole entire span of the business.
Wow. And you're right. I guess we're talking about little kids with the anxiety. And then on top of that, the divorce for both the parents, the kids, everybody around is really something that affects, the whole family unit. Um, I know COVID did a number on me, and it also did a number on my younger son. My younger son had a real tough time because he missed the end of kindergarten and then first grade. And some of those socialization skills you just see are starting to come back now. And we're talking about 4 or 5 years later. So, and he's 10. So you can see the anxiousness in him and the things of that nature. And I'm sure that's where the anxiety comes from. Now they're thrown back into it. They don't know how to interact with kids.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess it's a lot. Um, what ages do you serve at the center? I mean, are you kids through adults, mostly kids?
We're a pretty good mix right now. When I started, we were pretty exclusively kids and teenagers, but now I'd say I have a couple of really wonderful play therapists. So they'll start as young as like 4 or 5, which is therapy for that age is very difficult, but it's a lot of emotional regulation. So, 4 or 5 kids who will probably end up getting like an ADHD diagnosis or an anxiety diagnosis, they do really well with play therapy. And then we go up to about, I would say, like in the 60s, but I would say the bulk of our clientele right now is probably like late 20s to like early 40s. And then we have the kids.
Men or women? Who do you see more of?
Honestly, right now it's a pretty even distribution. Before COVID, I would have said it was women and children primarily, but we are seeing much more as far as it goes to men right now.
And just when you're counseling them and working on them, do you find that men are as open as women in the counseling center? Well, is there a hold? Is there a stigma that they have where they don't really want to open up? It takes a couple. What's the difference?
I would say there definitely is in the beginning. One of like the magics of building rapport with a therapist is that all of a sudden, and you can see it, especially where my counseling practice is located, we're right outside of Quantico. So we get a ton of military, and we're talking about like PTSD and vets and combat and all of that. And so people who are pretty much trained not to talk, but you can kind of see like once they start to realize like this is a safe place and I can talk about things that I haven't talked about with anybody, it's like the relief just floods people. Just the ability to be able to talk to somebody about things that they probably have never talked to anybody else about because they always had to be so like strong and carry everything on their shoulders, sort of.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. When I was down in Sarah Tucson, I was actually put in the military first responders lodge, and I met a lot of them.
Yeah.
And they had opened up, and we started talking about it. And my roommate always says something. He's trying to feel his feelings. And I asked him about that, and he said that being in the military for so long, you don't feel your feelings. There's just no feelings. You do your job, you move on. And every time we talk now, because we're still in contact, I'll ask him, "Are you feeling your feelings?" And he's like, I'm trying to feel them." So I guess, having that mentality of not being able to feel your feelings and going to counseling is something that you really have to work against to make it work. I'm a firm believer that if you don't go all the way into counseling, it's not going to benefit you.
For sure. Yeah, yeah. You've got to be able to, and that trust is so crucial, is to be able to like trust another human with these like really vulnerable moments. So that initial rapport building is so important, especially with people who are sort of reticent.
Yeah. So besides play therapy, what other kind of therapeutic options do you have there? I mean, is there EDMR? Is there, what type of things do you?
EMDR, yeah. I have a couple of clinicians who are trained in EMDR, which is good, especially because we do have a lot of trauma because we have, like I said, a lot of combat vets. So we do, it's a lot of CBT, which is for anxiety. CBT works wonderful. I have marriage and family therapists. I have an awesome art therapist. She's super eclectic, a lot of fun. That does a lot of good for kids. I have a clinician who's trained in sand tray therapy, which is something kind of akin to play therapy, but it also helps people who have a hard time expressing their emotions sort of unblock things without having to talk. Let's see, we don't do anything like psychotropic. Like I don't have anybody who prescribes or anything like that, but it's a lot of, marriage and family therapy. I have a pretty good range of therapists. If you need something, we're probably going to have it. We don't do eating disorders and we don't do sexual abuse. Those are the two things that we don't do.
Okay. And with the marriage and counseling, I mean, do you find a lot of the marriage things come from one spouse having, anxiety, depression, or do you see a lot of issues like that? I mean, is it hard for the spouses to, function when one of them is suffering from depression and anxiety?
It's there's two sides to that one. Like it can be, especially if your significant other doesn't understand mental health, or if, like you had mentioned before, that stigma of like just snap out of it. Come on, like sometimes you get that, like just get better. Like it doesn't work that way.
Right.
A lot of times this is biochemical, and a lot of people don't understand that this is, it's like if you have diabetes, you have to take your insulin. Like, it's a very sort of equivocal thing, but not a lot of people understand that still. So if you have a spouse who's like, great, get help and feel better and they'll participate with you, it works a lot better than someone who might go in and be like, I don't know why they're so depressed, or I don't know why they won't stop crying. That's where it gets difficult.
Yeah, it's always that question is, that I've faced a lot is how are you depressed? You have everything. You have a great wife, you
Yeah.
have healthy kids, you have a job. How are you depressed? And you start thinking and questioning yourself, like, how am I depressed? And then you realize that it's biochemical, it's, the trauma that you faced growing up and things of that nature that are all out of your control that you don't really start to conquer until you're my age and you're 45. I will say though, I started when I started my therapy, um, I started a DBT class and it was every week and it was virtual. And I was the only male there and everybody else was like 20 to 25. And here I am, 45. And my big thing was always that they would always say to me, like, well, what do you think? And I would always say, I'm just so jealous that you started earlier.
Really? Yeah.
Do you find that with people? Like some of them kind of, I don't, it's not like I got mad at myself. I mean, I had the opportunities to get better and my wife really pushed me to, seek out help. But I don't want to say I lied, but I played the game. Like I didn't take the medication. Wasn't honest at therapy. I mean, do you find people who kind of wish they did it earlier, but you find that it's really when the person is ready to do it?
Yeah, you said it exactly right. That's exactly what it is. A lot of times when somebody's ready, you can tell. And a lot of times, in all honesty, like if you think you're fooling your therapist, you're probably not. We know when you're not taking your meds and we know when you're not really buying in, but it's not really like our job, if you're not ready, you're just not going to be able to go there. You can tell when somebody's ready, they're really going to buy into whatever's going on and try and heal some of that stuff. And I do have, we've had a lot of people who say, gosh, why didn't I do this when I was younger? Like my life would have been so much better if I had just known.
Yeah, I think that's, one of the things that I struggle with now is the fact that, I did waste a good 17 years trying to beat it by myself. I think that's the former athlete in me
Yeah,
is,
for sure.
you try to conquer it and you just can't.
Yep.
You need the help, and asking for help is just a big you know stigma, like we said.
Yeah.
One of my questions is the lack of PHPs. So the PHP, and you're not, you're a day center, day treatment center, so people come in and out. I went to a rehab center, which is all day. I lived there for 30 days, but they also have PHPs, which are partial hospitalization programs. Kristen, I live out on Long Island, right about 50 miles from New York City. There's not one for
That
mental health.
shocked me. Yeah, when you said that, that's shocking.
Why? Why is there such a lack of PHPs in this country?
I don't know, and I bet you it's kind of dependent on your area because in Northern Virginia they're all over the place. So when you told me that, I was like shocked, but also when you think about it, they're expensive, and if you don't get insurance companies to buy in and pay for PHPs, you can't run that on self-pay because a lot of people can't afford it, if that makes sense. And
Yeah, it
running,
does.
yeah, I was gonna
God, I'm
say
sorry.
running a practice of any kind in the medical field, unless you're in a really affluent area where people can just pay cash, is really dependent on insurance. And I hate to say it, but insurance companies are not paying what they need to be paying as far as being able to run some of these practices. And that's my guess is that it's probably really expensive and they just are having a hard time with that.
Yeah. I know that because when I was looking to come back, I had to find a PHP and there wasn't one. So I had to kind of create my own program, which I was definitely all right with, but it's definitely different than having a place where you can go.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and I think the insurance is a big deal. I mean, I talk to people all the time, and their sister needs help but doesn't have the insurance. And to go away, they can range from anywhere from $1,000 to $4,000 a day for some of these treatment centers. Um, and then there's the logistics of getting there and things of that nature. And like you said, even for people who want a day treatment option, like Bright Horizons, you can't get in right away because of the wait, because of the lack of it. So, I know there's 58 million adults alone who suffer from some type of mental illness. And you're looking at that population. What are we talking about? Percentages of them getting the help they need?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, it is, sometimes I feel guilty that I'm not, being able to make it more, but I've got 30 clinicians already. Like that's a lot for
right.
for one business, but I could probably, add another 20. I mean, that's how bad the need is. I think a lot of people, because it's not publicized enough, a lot of people don't realize like we're really on the cusp, especially for the teenagers. Like that's where I worry is like these teenagers are really starting to get lost and they really need these resources and they need them to be available. They need to get into clinicians who understand what's going on for teenagers nowadays with the social media and like the changes in their brain chemistry and all of that. It's scary. There definitely needs to be some kind of a push. I do think some of these telehealth companies are going to help at least take some of the load off, but not all populations are amenable to telehealth. So you can't do play therapy with a child through telehealth. Like you
Right.
need somebody in person. If somebody's grieving or they have PTSD, they really need an in-person therapist.
Yeah. And I don't even think it's for the kids. I know myself, when I meet with my therapist in person, it's a lot deeper, the connections there than I am when I'm on, a Zoom. I'm doing other things, I'm checking the phone, I'm writing down notes that may come to me. Where when you're one to one, and like you said, I mean, we have areas that are extremely rural in this country, and who's going to put up a mental health center in a rural area? You're not going to get the clientele, you have to go to the big city. Um, and it's funny just to even talk about that. A lot of the veterans who I met came from Alaska, and the only mental health issues they had, or not mental health issues, but the only mental health facility they had was through the VA. And they said the VA wasn't equipped to handle the severity of it. So that's why they were sent down to Sierra Tucson.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, when I was down there were people. I think they said there were 30 states represented when I was down there, and there was only 100 and I think 8 people at the location at that time. But
Wow.
just seeing the majority and how widespread it is, it's just crazy. Um, the stigma increasing, staying the same, decreasing? I mean, I know we have the you know, mental health month and things of that nature, but I mean, do you think it's enough or do you think we need more?
I think it's getting better. I do definitely think some of like, I mean, they're promoting it on TV, like this, BetterHelp and companies like that. They're trying really hard to take away some of the stigma. We're obviously not there, especially with certain populations. Certain populations just, unfortunately, it's been, especially the older populations, it's very much been drilled into them that you just suck it up and you get better. And you made a really good point about athletes. I mean, I was an athlete too. Like we don't show that we're struggling. And all those populations need outlets and they need to be told like it's okay. The best thing I think that could happen is even in school age is they let everybody have some kind of therapy and then they decide for themselves whether it's good for them or not, because you don't a really common misconception is like things have to be terrible in order to get therapy. And that's not true. Like
Right.
you can just be like transitional in life or going from being, a high school student to being in college or, whatever it is, and just use a little bit of help. You just need a little bit of help. You don't have to be suffering a major crisis in order to get therapy.
Right. And I feel, and listen, you're the professional. And like I say all the time, the only thing I'm a professional on is my opinions and what I've been through. Um, I feel like people don't reach out until it's too late. You know what I mean? Once they start, you start with the anxiety, you're not reaching out for the anxiety, you're not doing that. And then by the time the anxiety builds itself into that deep depression, now you're at almost like an emergency call. Like, I
You
don't,
get
I
that
mean,
amount.
yeah. Let me just pick your brain on the student athlete. So we'll go back 23 years. I put out my first podcast and a doctor came up to me. And I had talked about being an athlete and talked about the fact that, we are trained to just go, go, go. When there's an injury, you go. When you don't feel right, you go. The sport becomes number one. Not even if it's an injury, but all of our days ended. Yours with basketball, mine with football and track. You know, why is that? I know what I was told, but I want to hear why is that such a toll on a person when you lose that ability to do that activity that you've done for so long?
Oh, yeah, that's a killer, isn't it? You're not expected or you don't expect it when it ends. I remember feeling like this hole inside of me when basketball ended. I was like, well, what do I do with my life now? Is that what you're referring to? Like where
Yeah, like I
it
don't think
is.
people understand that
Um,
void that you have.
yeah.
It's like losing a part of you. My thing, and then I guess I'll ask you to add on, is my therapist said, a lot of things I get, is I'll get the depression, anxiety, and I'll get, very, extreme suicidal ideations. And, they're very violent in nature. And you know me, and, I'm not a violent person. But, she has said to me that the fact that I played football and wrestled for, 10 years of my life gave me an outlet to
Mhm.
like get all that aggression out. And then one day, and I know it's cliche, but you don't know when it's going to end. My career ended after sophomore year when I had to have two shoulder surgeries. Some people, career ends at their final buzzer. Other people, never get there, they get hurt. What what is that? I mean, can you just describe that loss as an athlete just for the people out there? Like, what is that loss that you feel?
I mean, it's a piece of you, right? Especially high level athletes. Like we both played, in a Division I sport. So high level athletes, like from when you're young, you're kind of taught like this is what you do. This is a piece of who you are. And I still remember, I mean, Katie, Katie,
Yes.
obviously, a good friend of mine. I remember that last game, and after that last game, we kind of looked at each other and we were like, well, "What do we do now?" Like it's your whole life and identity morphs. And I played afterwards in like just kind of like adult leagues and stuff, so I maintained a tiny semblance of that. But when I tore my ACL and I couldn't play anymore, like it's still to this day, sometimes I'll pick up a basketball and I'll feel my body calm down because that for so long that was a piece of who I was, if that makes any sense. So it
Yeah.
is a huge coping skill, and it is, it's hard. It's always hard to lose a part of your identity. It's almost like a grieving process.
Yeah. I think that's the key word is the grieving process because I think you said if you make it through your career to the end in college and you're not going on, it's kind of like, all right, I completed it and I can grieve this way. But, when you're that 16-year-old kid who's getting recruited to go play, baseball at Pepperdine and, you throw that pitch in the third inning and your elbow pops
Yeah.
and it's gone. I mean, it's gone.
Yeah.
And, we talk about mental health issues, but, we don't look at that 16-year-old kid who, you think about the injury in the physical sense, but you don't think about the emotional and mental toll that that's going to have on that kid for the rest of his life, like the woulda, coulda, shouldas and things of that nature.
Yeah, and it's a true grieving process, and that's where you have to really look at, especially when you're talking about that age, is, you have to really be careful about looking for other things to help compensate, like substance abuse and things like that. That's where those things become really something that needs to be looked at because there is this hole. And, like unless you have something constructive to fill that hole with, then unfortunately, we lose a lot of people towards things that are more kind of destructive.
Right. And listen, there are people who go to those destructive ways, drinking alcohol and things of those. But like you said, a lot of times those are just masks for the trauma. They are a side effect of
Oh, for
trauma.
sure. Yeah.
Whether it's an abusive family, an abusive relationship, losing something, losing someone, and that was the question. One of the times in Sierra, there were, a lot of guys were down there for alcohol abuse, and they would say, "I'm just a drinker. I never thought I had a trauma." And it's kind of trying to figure out what that trauma is.
Yeah, there's always something. I mean, and well, there is a piece of it without a doubt that's biochemical. Some people pick up a drink and then it's just the way their body is wired. But almost always there is anxiety or there is a trauma that's being covered up. It's one of those two things are very often at the core of any kind of addiction.
Yeah. Here's my question to you. Unlimited resources handed to you. What do you do for the mental health? What do you start? What do you do to, assist the growth, I'm sorry, of, mental health help in your area in the country? What's our biggest need, priority thing you would like to see done right now?
Honestly, and I think this is a great question because I think if we had unlimited resources where you could continue to pay your therapists and get them to go into schools and get them to show kids from a young age, and it might not help so much some of the older people right now who I do still think should be allowed to have, mental health coverage should be just part and parcel of any health insurance for no copay. It's not true anymore. It was during COVID. It's not true anymore. But I think if we could get therapists into schools early and sort of decrease some of the stigma and some of the shame and show people that don't know that it's available, what it's like, then we're going to have a generation that grows up knowing that there are outlets, there are resources, like you just have to reach out. I can't tell you how many people were like, I had no idea. Or often I'll get people who think like stereotypically, like you're going to lay down on a couch and I'm going to analyze you. And my therapy style is very much just talking, and laughing and like building rapport. And people are always like, I had no idea that therapy could be fun. Like, yeah, it doesn't have to be this horrible thing where you're just crying and you're miserable. Like, it's a relationship. And that's what's healing about therapy is that relationship. I think if we could really get people when they're younger to understand and destigmatize it, that would make a humongous difference.
Yeah, I talk about the fact that it's hard to hide. I have three kids, two of them kind of know what's going on, and I didn't realize that until we sat them down and talked about me going away, and they were like, "Dad, you need to go away." But I think back to last year, I was in school and I was having a rough day, and one of my kids was a senior, was a freshman, and had real bad depression, and every day he was just a sad kid. He was a great kid, and then by his senior year, he had really changed, come around, had really found himself. And I was in there one day just feeling down, and he was like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, "Nothing. I'm all right." He goes, "You're not all right." He goes, "I know you're not all right." And the kids know, but I think it goes in point to the fact that his parents had taken the time and put in the work to see him grow. That he was able to recognize it. And, the growth in 4 years was astronomical, to the point where he could tell on someone else's face, how they were feeling it. And, I don't know. I think that I think people are having a harder time hiding it.
Yeah.
Um, I think, a lot of people are struggling tremendously, don't know what to do, don't know where to go. Um, Let me ask you this, how you would feel as a therapist. I have a lot of people who say they don't want, they're going, I guess, therapist shopping, and they go from one person to the next, and they try to find a person that they have the connection with, or they create that bond with. And one of the things I've been telling people is to write your story down.
Mhm.
Write your story down, give it to the therapist before you get there and say, look, if there's any questions, you can ask me then. But
Mhm.
it's traumatizing to go over the story time and time again. Is that a good idea? I mean, I want to ask a professional. Am I giving sound advice there, or do you not like that idea?
No, I mean, it is therapeutic actually to write your story down. I would just want to make sure that if somebody's writing their story down, because things come up and they come out in those situations, that they have an appropriate outlet in case it does. Does that make
Okay.
sense? Like,
Absolutely.
want to make sure that there is like, either a partner or a parent or a therapist that a lot of times we tell our clients to write because that brings up stuff and all of a sudden they'll be crying like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this. So you have to be kind of careful with that kind of thing. But I also really encourage my clients when they come in, like, hey, if you don't think this is a good fit, we're going to find somebody else because that is so important to have a good fit with your therapist. If you feel like they're not listening or it's just not right, then you need to get somebody else.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I think one of the hard parts for people who've been to therapy and kind of lose it, because I know I had a therapist and she kind of had told me 3 or 4 times, I think it's time to move on. I think we had run our course, and it was very hard for me. I think it took me like 4 or 5 months because you don't want to leave. You have that sense of comfort and you don't know how that next person's going to pick up, and you kind of know what they're doing. And I think that's one of the things that's, kind of stops people. And people have to know that, there are good therapists out there. I mean,
Oh,
there's some bad ones.
yeah. There are some bad ones, but and one thing that's, look at reviews. I tell all of my clients, you can usually tell in your body, like you can feel when something's right and you can feel when something's off. If it doesn't feel right, then I usually say, give it 3 sessions because after 3 sessions, you're going to know whether it's a good fit or not. But the majority of people who get into this field, they do it because they want to help people. And most of them are good. I mean, of course, you're going to get your ones every once in a while, but it is important to sort of listen to your gut. But that relationship it becomes very strong. When I moved up to Philly from Virginia, I had to leave my therapist and I thought like it was like a breakup. I was like, I'm so sad. And he was like, I know, me too. Like,
So say that again. So as a therapist, you go and see a therapist.
oh yeah, every therapist should have a therapist.
Really?
Actually is not a horrible thing. Like to not like I tell people like you should ask your therapist if they have a therapist. Like all of my therapists, I can't make them have therapists, but I strongly recommend that they do.
Is that just from the amount of stuff that you hear, the heavy weighted stuff to try to get it off, your chest and kind of just bounce it off someone else?
Partially, and partially because a lot of times our clients will bring up our own stuff, and it's really important to be able to separate like what is my stuff versus what is, my client dinged this in me. I forgot about this. I need to go talk to my therapist about it. I can't talk to my client about it. You have to be able to differentiate those kinds of things. But we also do, we hear a lot of really tough stuff. And so you need to have somebody you can talk to about it, or even somebody who you can say, like, hey, I've got this case. Like, I need some help. And if you have a therapist you trust, that's a perfect person to sort of staff a case with.
So, all right. So what's going on right now? Anything in the future this year? I know we are in the first month, first week of the new year. Professionally and personally, any big plans?
Um, let's see. Well, I actually am going back to school. I'm gonna get my master's in forensic psychology because I do a lot, or in the beginning of my career, I did a lot of evaluations for custody and situations, and it's just kind of gone through the roof. And that keeps the child sort of out of the middle of divorce proceedings so that like I can kind of like intervene, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So I'm going back to get my master's in forensic psychology just because I want to do something a little tiny bit different. So that's actually, I was dreading it a little bit. So I was like, who wants to go back and get another master's? But I actually am kind of enjoying it. It's a nice kind of change. So we'll see. With the business, like I said, I'm sort of on the cusp of deciding am I going to expand, or like what am I going to do? Because now I'm in Philly and the business is in Virginia. So that's sort of where I am in that one.
Would you expand to the Philly area? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, it's something that I'm thinking about, definitely. You know, in the area that I'm at in Philly, I went, to my primary care up here for my, my checkup, and she was like, we need clinicians. We need clinicians who work with teenagers, and that's what I do, is I work with teenagers. And she was like, if you start a practice up here, let me know. She was like, I could have you full. So they need it up here just as much as they need it anywhere else in the country. So I'm thinking about it. We'll see.
That would be awesome. So we could have a Bright Horizons in Northern Virginia and then one in the Philly area.
I know. Go
And,
figure.
and then you could start a PHP on Long Island or New York and retire.
There you go. There you go.
Chris, anything else you want to say before we go? Any other
No,
last words of wisdom?
I definitely encourage people, if you have the ability to go and just try therapy. A lot of insurance companies offer what's called EAP, employee assistance programs, and you get like 8 free therapy sessions. So I really encourage people to try and utilize those benefits, because you never know when it's going to pop up that you need it, and it's good to have something established just in case. So like you said, so that if it becomes emergent, you know where to go, you know what to do, you know how, like who it is that you need to call.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it. And have a great new year.
Thank you. You too, Jonathan.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
And that wraps up another episode of Moderate to Severe. Remember, it is okay to not be okay. Mental health is a journey, and every step counts, no matter how small. I hope today's discussion resonated with you and reminded you that you are not alone in this journey. Please do not use this advice medically, as this is just my story and my tales. If you need help, please seek it out from a medical professional, go to a hospital, or call 988, the suicide hotline. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your friends or family. Let's crack the stigma and keep the conversation going. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join us next week. Take care of yourselves, and remember that reaching out for help is a sign of strength. Until next time, keep looking after your mental health and supporting each other. This is Jonathan Scott. Have a great day.